In one American city, rent just dropped from $3,290 to $1,186 in a single year. That's a 42% collapse. In another, landlords are slashing prices faster than Black Friday deals, and they're still struggling to find tenants. But here's what nobody's telling you. This isn't just about cheap rent. It's about a housing supply revolution that's quietly rewriting America's rental map. Before we dive in, hit subscribe, because every week we break down the economic shifts you're not supposed to ignore. On the surface, this looks like simple market corrections, a few cities with too many apartments. But dig deeper and you'll see this is part of a massive shift in how America builds housing, where people want to live, and which cities are winning or losing the new economy. Some of these cities cut red tape, others built like crazy. A few got hit by economic exits no one saw coming. Today we're counting down 10 American cities where rent is crashing hard, some down 9%, others down a jaw-dropping 42%. We're talking cities where landlords are practically begging tenants to sign leases, where new apartments sit empty for months, and where the rental game has completely flipped. And trust me, number one will blow your mind. Why is this happening? Simple. America just went through the biggest apartment construction boom in decades. Cities that said yes to housing are now flooded with supply. Meanwhile, migration patterns shifted, remote work changed where people want to live, and suddenly landlords have more competition than customers. The result? U.S. rents have fallen for 27 consecutive months as of October 2025. Some cities approved aggressive zoning reforms. Others rode pandemic booms that turned into busts. Welcome to the renter's revenge era, where supply and demand economics is playing out in real time across America's housing map. Number 10. Denver, Colorado. Denver landlords just watched single-family home rents drop $140 in a single month. The mile-high city's rental market is experiencing an unusual slowdown that has locals doing double takes at listing prices. Average rent sits at $2,087, but condos have dropped $48 month over month, and vacancies have jumped to 4,546 units, up over 100 since last spring. Single-family homes saw the biggest hit with a $140 monthly decline, while townhomes dropped $66. The vacancy spike is the real story here. Economic pressures, a tough sales market, slower in-migration, and changing housing laws are all colliding at once. Even homes in great locations are taking longer to lease, forcing landlords to sharpen their pricing strategies like never before. The average rent of $2,087 sounds expensive until you realize it's falling fast in a city that was red hot just 2 years ago. Turns out those mountain views don't matter much when there are 4,500 other apartments to choose from. Picture this. You're touring a sleek downtown Denver apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows. The landlord offers you a deal, then another deal, then throws in free parking. You realize you're in control now. This is the new Denver rental reality, where supply finally caught up with hype and renters are winning negotiations they used to lose. For a city built on outdoor lifestyle marketing and tech transplant dreams, watching rent drop this hard is a wake-up call. Denver's correction isn't dramatic compared to others on this list, but for a market that prided itself on steady growth, this is uncharted territory. Landlords who bought investment properties expecting infinite appreciation are now learning what happens when supply, demand, and economic reality converge. The question now is whether this is a temporary dip or the start of a longer trend as Colorado's housing laws continue evolving, and construction keeps pace with actual demand instead of speculative fever. If you're a renter in Denver right now, you have leverage you haven't had in years. Use it. Would you move to Denver now that rent's cooling? Drop it below. Number 9. Sunbury, Pennsylvania. This small Pennsylvania city saw rents drop 6 to 8%, and most Americans have never even heard of it. Sunbury is one of those smaller markets flying under the radar, but it's experiencing notable rent declines as part of a broader trend hitting mid-sized cities across the Northeast. Located along the Susquehanna River, Sunbury represents the kind of place that doesn't make flashy headlines, but tells a bigger story about America's shifting rental landscape. The 6 to 8% year-over-year decline might not sound dramatic compared to larger metros, but for a smaller market where rent was already relatively affordable, this is significant. It's part of a regional slowdown affecting Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and parts of Ohio where economic stagnation, population loss, and limited job growth are putting downward pressure on housing costs. The twist here is that Sunbury and places like it are often overlooked in national rental reports that focus on major metros. But these smaller cities are where many Americans actually live, and the rent relief happening here matters more to everyday people than what's happening in Manhattan or San Francisco. Reddit would call this the nobody knows we exist, but rent is finally affordable city. You know the rental market is wild when even Sunbury, Pennsylvania is making national headlines for rent drops. Picture this. A quiet Pennsylvania town where your biggest flex is telling friends back in Philly that your rent dropped and you have a backyard, a garage, and you're still paying less than they do for a studio. Sunbury isn't glamorous. It doesn't have a booming tech scene or trendy coffee shops on every corner, but it represents something important: the return of housing affordability to America's forgotten places. For young families, retirees on fixed incomes, or anyone priced out of bigger cities, markets like Sunbury are suddenly viable again. The rent drop here isn't about oversupply or construction booms. It's about economic reality setting in. Population shifts away from smaller towns and the end of pandemic-era price inflation that hit even rural markets. If you're looking for affordable living and don't need big city amenities, Sunbury and dozens of towns like it are quietly becoming options again. Ever heard of Sunbury before today? Be honest in the comments. Number 8. Athens, Georgia. College town rents are supposed to be bulletproof. Athens didn't get the memo. Home to the University of Georgia, Athens is seeing a 6 to 8% rent decline, unusual for a college town where student demand typically keeps prices stable year-round. College towns operate on their own economic rules. Steady enrollment, consistent student housing demand, and limited supply usually mean rent either stays flat or climbs slowly. Athens, breaking that pattern, signals something bigger is happening. The most likely culprit is new student housing construction that oversaturated the market. Developers saw demand, built aggressively, and now there are more beds than students willing to pay premium prices. Add in the rise of remote learning options, students living at home longer, and economic pressures on families, and suddenly landlords are competing harder than ever. The 6 to 8% year-over-year drop might not crash the market, but it's giving students and locals leverage they haven't had in years. Students are actually celebrating landlords competing for their business for once, instead of the usual take-it-or-leave-it lease terms that define college town rentals. Even the Bulldogs can't keep rent prices from rolling over. Picture this: walking distance to campus, game day atmosphere, southern charm, live music on weekends, and now rent that doesn't require selling plasma twice a week or taking out additional student loans just to afford off-campus housing. For students and young professionals in Athens, this is a rare moment of rental relief in a market that's been seller-friendly for decades. The bigger question is whether this trend continues or if it's a temporary blip caused by a construction surge that will balance out in a year or two. Either way, if you're looking at Athens right now, you have negotiating power. Landlords are offering concessions, waiving fees, and actually competing for tenants. That's not normal for a college town, and it won't last forever. The University of Georgia isn't shrinking, and Athens remains a desirable place to live. But for now, the rental market has shifted in favor of renters, and smart students are locking in deals before the market corrects. Any Georgia fans in the chat? How's the rental market treating you? Number 7. Las Vegas, Nevada. Sin City is losing the rent gamble and renters are finally winning. Las Vegas is one of 3 metros highlighted by Realtor.com as having prime rental opportunities due to continued price declines after a 2-year slide. For a city built on risk and reward, the rental market is now offering rewards to renters who were getting crushed just a few years ago. The 2-year decline continuing into 2025 shows this isn't a fluke or a one-time correction. This is a sustained trend driven by new apartment construction outpacing demand, post-pandemic economic adjustments, and volatility in the hospitality sector that drives much of Vegas's economy. During the pandemic, people fled expensive coastal cities for Vegas's no-income tax appeal and relatively affordable housing. Rent surged. Developers responded by building thousands of new units. Now those units are hitting the market just as demand cooled, remote work flexibility decreased, and people reconsidered whether living in a desert with 110-degree summers was worth it. The result is a renter's market where landlords are offering concessions and tenants have options. Realtor.com literally said renters are at an advantage, which is the real estate equivalent of admitting the house doesn't always win. The only thing dropping faster than rent in Vegas is tourists' wallets at the slots. Picture this: living off the Strip with access to world-class entertainment, incredible restaurants, no state income tax, desert sunsets, nearby hiking in Red Rock Canyon, and paying less rent than you did 2 years ago, while your friends in California are still getting gouged. For renters, Vegas right now is what locals call a plus EV move, expected value positive. The odds are in your favor for once, but like any good gamble, timing matters. The rental market won't stay soft forever. Las Vegas is still growing, still attracting businesses, and still benefiting from California exodus trends. At some point, supply and demand will balance and rent will stabilize or climb again. For now, though, if you're considering Vegas, this is your window. Would you move to Vegas for cheaper rent? Yes or no? Number 6, Atlanta, Georgia. The ATL just became a renter's paradise, and landlords are scrambling. Atlanta joins Las Vegas as one of the 3 metros with the most significant rent advantages for renters in 2025, following sustained price drops that have completely flipped the market dynamic. This is the city that was supposed to be the next big tech hub, the affordable alternative to San Francisco and Austin, the place where everyone was moving. And they did move here in massive numbers, which triggered an explosive apartment construction boom that's now flooding the market with supply. The result is a multi-year decline that shows no signs of stopping. Atlanta's rental correction is part of a broader Sunbelt trend where pandemic-era migration drove overbuilding and now markets are adjusting. Corporate relocations that surged during 2020 and 2021 have slowed, remote work policies tightened, and suddenly Atlanta has thousands of new luxury apartments competing for tenants who have options. Landlords are offering rent specials, waiving deposits, throwing in free months, and still struggling to fill units. For renters, this is the best market conditions Atlanta has seen in over a decade. The city that was supposed to be the next tech hub is now the place where tech workers can actually afford rent again without roommates or hour-long commutes. Atlanta traffic is still terrible, but at least you're saving money while sitting in it. Picture this: Southern hospitality, a booming food scene, major airport access for travel, growing job market, diverse neighborhoods, thriving arts and music culture, and rent prices that don't require a second mortgage or venture capital funding to afford. This is what Atlanta promised to be before the pandemic rent surge made it unaffordable for the very people it was supposed to attract. Now the market is correcting and opportunity is back. The question is how long it lasts. Atlanta isn't stopping construction, the metro area is still growing, and jobs are still coming. But for now, supply has outpaced demand and renters have the advantage. ATL natives, are y'all seeing this rent drop? Confirm below. If you're still here, you now know more about America's rental market than 99% of people complaining about rent on Twitter. But wait till you see the top 5. One city's rent dropped almost 20%, another fell to its lowest level since 2021, and number 1? Let's just say locals literally can't believe it's real. Let's keep going. Number 5, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Minneapolis rent just dropped around 9%, and it's not because of the cold. The Twin Cities are experiencing one of the most significant rental market corrections among major Midwest metros, with prices falling sharply year over year in a trend that's shocking landlords and delighting renters who suffered through years of steady increases. The approximately 9% year-over-year decline makes Minneapolis the leading Midwest metro in rent drops, and it's happening for a reason. The city actually built housing. Local zoning reforms enabled more construction. Developers responded, and new multifamily units flooded the market just as demand stabilized. This is supply and demand economics playing out exactly as textbooks predict, which almost never happens in housing because cities usually block construction. Minneapolis didn't, and now renters are benefiting. The rent drop is part of a broader Midwest affordability shift, where cities like Minneapolis, Columbus, and Cleveland are becoming competitive alternatives to expensive coastal markets. For remote workers, young professionals, and families, the combination of falling rent, strong job markets, good schools, and actual seasons is making the Midwest appealing again. Minnesotans are too polite to say "I told you so," but they're definitely thinking it while signing cheaper leases and enjoying a cost of living that suddenly makes sense again. You survived Minnesota winters, you deserve a rent break, and apparently the housing market agrees. Picture this: living by the chain of lakes, 4 distinct seasons, a thriving arts and theater scene, excellent schools, bike-friendly infrastructure, a strong job market, and telling your coastal friends you're paying less than half their rent while actually having space and savings. This is the Minneapolis value proposition right now, and it's real. The 9% drop isn't a temporary blip. It's the result of pro-housing policies that prioritized building over restricting, and it's a case study other cities should be studying. Minneapolis proved you can be a desirable, growing city and still have affordable rent if you're willing to allow construction. For renters looking at Midwest options, Minneapolis just became one of the best deals in America. Minneapolis, folks, is the rent drop real, or are we missing something? Number 4, Austin, Texas. The city that became America's tech darling just hit its lowest rent since 2021. Austin experienced an 8.8% year-over-year drop in median asking rent, landing at $1,285 in May 2025, the lowest level since February 2021. This is a dramatic reversal for a city that spent years as the poster child for runaway rent growth and tech-driven housing inflation. What happened? Austin actually built housing, a lot of it. The city approved 64.5 multifamily units per 10,000 people, the highest rate nationwide. Developers looked at Austin's explosive growth during the pandemic, saw tech companies and remote workers flooding in, and built thousands of new apartments. Those apartments are now hitting the market just as the tech boom cooled, layoffs hit, and people reconsidered whether Austin's heat, traffic, and rising costs were worth it. The result is an oversupplied rental market where landlords are competing hard and renters have leverage for the first time in years. The median rent of $1,385 is stunning for a city where people were paying $2,000 plus for mediocre apartments just 3 years ago. Austin saw the most dramatic rent declines in major metro markets, and tech workers who moved here in 2021, paying peak prices, are absolutely not happy watching new tenants get the same units for 30% less. Turns out when you actually build housing supply, prices go down. Who knew? Economists. Economists knew, but Austin had to learn the hard way. Picture this: live music capital of the world, taco trucks on every corner, tech jobs still available despite layoffs, hill country weekends, Barton Springs pool days, breakfast tacos, no state income tax, and rent that finally matches the keep it weird, keep it affordable vibe Austin used to have before it became a victim of its own success. This is the Austin correction people have been predicting for years, and it's finally here. The question is whether it continues or stabilizes. Construction is still ongoing, tech jobs are still coming despite slowdowns, and Austin remains one of the fastest growing metros in America. Austin transplants, are you mad you overpaid in 2022? Drop a crying emoji below. Number 3. Providence, Rhode Island. Providence rent dropped nearly 19%, the biggest crash in the Northeast. Rhode Island's capital is experiencing one of the steepest rent declines in the entire country, with prices falling approximately 19% year over year in a correction that has landlords panicking and renters celebrating. This is the biggest drop in the Northeast, and it's happening in a city that was wildly overheated during the pandemic when people fled Boston for cheaper alternatives within commuting distance. Providence became a pandemic darling for remote workers who wanted New England charm, proximity to Boston, and lower costs. Rent surged as demand overwhelmed supply. Landlords raised prices aggressively. Then the pandemic ended, remote work policies tightened, people moved back to Boston or left the region entirely, and new construction hit the market. The result is a nearly 19% year-over-year collapse that represents one of the most dramatic rental corrections in America. For a major metro market to see this kind of decline is unusual and signals just how overheated Providence got and how hard it's now correcting. The economic factors driving this include the post-pandemic exodus reversing, new construction adding supply, and economic pressures hitting renters who can't afford the inflated prices anymore. Providence was never supposed to be expensive, but it became expensive temporarily, and now the market is snapping back to reality. The smallest state just delivered the biggest rental relief, and locals are wondering if this is real life or if they're dreaming about affordable rent for the first time in 5 years. You can finally afford to live in Providence and still have money left for Dell's lemonade, coffee milk, and Federal Hill dinners without choosing between rent and living. Picture this: historic architecture along Benefit Street, waterfront views, proximity to Boston without Boston prices, a thriving food scene led by Johnson & Wales graduates, RISD art culture, New England charm, and rent that dropped nearly 1/5 in a single year. This is Providence right now, offering value that seemed impossible just 2 years ago when everyone was moving here and prices were spiraling. Providence locals, did you see this coming? Tell us below. Tampa is experiencing a rental correction that has landlords rethinking their entire investment strategy. As part of Florida's broader affordability crisis turning into a renter's opportunity, Tampa's market has shifted dramatically from the pandemic boom years when everyone was moving to Florida for sunshine, no income tax, and remote work freedom. The rental market surged as people flooded in. Then developers responded with aggressive construction, and now supply is overwhelming demand just as insurance costs, hurricane risks, and cost of living realities are making people reconsider Florida. Tampa's rent decline is part of a statewide trend where markets that got the hottest during the pandemic are now cooling the fastest. New apartment complexes are offering multiple months free rent, waiving fees, and competing aggressively for tenants. For renters who got priced out during the boom, this is a chance to get back into markets that seem permanently out of reach. The bigger story here is Florida's economic reckoning. Insurance costs have skyrocketed, property taxes are climbing, and the paradise narrative is colliding with financial reality. Renters are benefiting as landlords who overextended themselves are now forced to lower prices to fill units and cover mortgages. Picture this: Tampa Bay waterfront, year-round warm weather, no state income tax, growing job market, professional sports, Cuban sandwiches, and rent that's finally affordable again after years of explosion. This is Tampa's second chance at being the affordable Florida alternative it used to be before the pandemic turned it into another overpriced market. For renters considering Florida, Tampa is back on the table as a viable option where your money actually goes further and you're not paying a premium just to say you live in sunshine. Tampa renters, are you seeing deals or are landlords still trying to hold the line? Number 1. Sarasota, Florida. Sarasota rent dropped from $3,290 to $1,886 in 1 year. That's a 42.67% collapse, the biggest in America. Sarasota, Florida is the undisputed leader in rent declines with the most dramatic year-over-year drop in the entire nation. From January 2024 to January 2025, average rent plummeted by nearly 43%. A $1,404 per month decrease that has left landlords stunned and renters wondering if the numbers are even real. This isn't a typo. This isn't a statistical error. This is an actual market collapse driven by a perfect storm of oversupply, demand destruction, and economic reality hitting a market that got way too hot, way too fast. Sarasota became a pandemic darling as retirees, remote workers, and wealthy transplants flooded in from the Northeast and Midwest, attracted by Gulf Coast beaches, warm weather, and Florida's tax advantages. Rent surged to nearly $3,300 as demand overwhelmed supply, and landlords realized they could charge whatever they wanted. Developers saw the frenzy and responded by building aggressively, adding thousands of new luxury units to a market that suddenly couldn't absorb them. Then everything changed. The remote work wave slowed. People reconsidered whether $3,300 rent in Sarasota made sense. Florida's insurance crisis hit hard as premiums skyrocketed and hurricane risks became impossible to ignore. Property taxes climbed. The cost of living that was supposed to be affordable suddenly wasn't. And all those new apartments hit the market at once with nobody to fill them. The result is a 42.67% collapse that represents the most extreme example of what happens when a market overheats then overcorrects. Landlords who bought investment properties in 2022 expecting infinite appreciation are now sitting on units they can't fill at half the price they projected. Some are facing foreclosure. Others are selling at losses. The Sarasota rental crash is a cautionary tale about speculative real estate fever and the inevitable correction that follows. National media focuses on Miami and Tampa, but Sarasota's rental crash is the most extreme example of supply and demand economics playing out in real time. It's a case study that will be taught in economics classes for years as a warning about what happens when markets detach from fundamentals. Imagine paying $3,290 for a Sarasota apartment in 2024, then watching your neighbor move into the same unit for $1,886 a year later. That's not a rent drop. That's a financial existential crisis and a reminder that housing markets can crash just as fast as they boom. Picture this: Gulf Coast beaches with white sand and turquoise water, year-round sunshine and perfect weather, a growing arts scene with galleries and theaters, booming restaurant culture, access to nature and outdoor activities, and rent that just became affordable for the first time in years after being completely out of reach. The catch? Your landlord is probably crying into their mortgage statement. For renters, Sarasota represents an unprecedented opportunity. For landlords and investors, it's a nightmare. The market went from feeding frenzy to fire sale in less than 2 years. Sarasota locals, are you seeing this? Is it real? Drop your stories below because the rest of America needs to hear this. Whether it's Austin building like there's no tomorrow, Providence correcting from pandemic prices, or Sarasota experiencing a full-blown rental collapse, every one of these cities is showing us the same thing. Housing supply matters. When cities say yes to building, rents fall. When demand shifts and supply floods in, landlords lose their leverage. This isn't random. This is economics playing out across America, and it's rewriting the rental map in real time. For 27 consecutive months, U.S. rents have declined because construction finally caught up with demand in key markets. The cities on this list aren't suffering, they're correcting. Renters who were priced out are getting second chances. Markets that became unaffordable are becoming accessible again. And the lesson is clear: if you want affordable housing, you have to build it. The places that understood this are now seeing rent drops. The places that blocked construction are still seeing rent climb. This is the new reality of American housing, where supply and demand actually matter, and markets that embrace construction are rewarding renters, while markets that restrict it are punishing them. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe, because next week we're covering the cities where rent is rising the fastest, the metros where housing supply collapsed, and the economic forces making some cities winners and others losers in the new housing economy. We're also breaking down the countries offering free citizenship, the cities secretly restricting cash, and the nations quietly collapsing in slow motion. This is World Economics Explained. See you in the next one.